Hello and welcome everyone to Power Up with JK Fitness. I'm your host, I'm Julia Cogrin, but I've got a special guest today. It's my friend, a fellow coach, Joey. So, Joey, thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Today, with Joey, we're going to explore the subject of strength training and more precisely of why do some people don't see enough results or see no results actually sometimes even though they strength train regularly consistently but still not seeing enough results that they certainly deserve. So firstly, before we actually dive in, I wanted to introduce you a little bit, Joey, and if you could maybe let us know how you become a coach and how you yourself got into strength training.
Yeah, definitely. So I, way back in the day, used to train as a dancer. So I worked professionally as a dancer for several years. And then with that kind of side of training, there was always, I don't want to say strength training, but some form of resistance work has always been as a baseline. So we used to have it called like strength and conditioning. We'd have it like twice a week, where we would basically just look at forms of like squats, of like push-ups, kind of like basic body weight movements that we would then add in. I don't want to say light weights, but weights too.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's always been a kind of like a thread of everything I've done. And as I like went through all my training and like my dance career, that was the side of things that I kind of enjoyed the most and kind of found that I resonated
Strength
the
training
most.
outside, like inside the dancing experience. That's amazing. That's quite
Yeah.
surprising, actually. Okay. But what's your
It's
training like now?
Yeah, well, to be honest, it's quite funny actually. Like if we talk about the dance side of it, when I was at school, we used to have so you'd have the boys and the girls strength classes. So I used to obviously go to the boys, but I also used to go to the girls ones as well. Just kind of
Wow.
like hope that I can try and get in them. But like training wise now, I would say is a mixture. So it would be more of like a functional aspect what I approach because I do lots of high rocks and high rocks work. So it's lots of strength training, but equally there's lots of running and like conditioning work alongside.
Yeah. Gotcha. Thanks for explaining. I actually didn't know that about you. I remember you were a dancer, but I didn't know that this was strength training was the best part of your dancing. So
Yeah.
is it, it's strength training now that is your favorite part out of the whole high rocks training, or do you enjoy other parts as well?
Yeah, it's quite sad because I really don't enjoy running. I
Why
like
the hell are
running
you
with
doing
people.
high rocks then? There's so
Ju
much cardio there.
Julia, you tell me, like I don't know why. Like
We're a bit of
I
psychos. We like a bit of, masochism, whether
exactly
it's
that's what I was gonna
strength or
say.
cardio. Cool.
I always feel like I like a challenge, and for me, like I'm very asthmatic as well, so which I don't like to use as a bit of an excuse, but for running wise, being asthmatic makes it for me really quite hard, and that makes me want to do it more, if that makes sense. Like I like a bit of a challenge with my training.
Yeah, that's why I said we're a bit of psychos. Like we always do like taking ourselves outside the comfort zone. So
Yeah.
anyway, today we're here to discuss strength training. And obviously you being as a coach in your experience, do you notice people maybe not inside your program and but in general like from your experience of training in various gyms, have you noticed people that come regularly and they put all effort in but possibly the results they see are not reflective of those efforts?
Yeah, like I literally just got off a call with someone that was about to join my coaching program with exactly the same issue. And it's the fact that they've been putting in all this effort, they've had like in their head, they know what they want to achieve and they feel like they're putting in all the work to get there, but they're just not making any progress with it. And I think it's a really common thing for people to have. Like when you don't know the foundations of things or how to maybe structure a session or structure a program, you can try as hard as you want, but you're not going to get anywhere. Does that make sense? Like,
It does make a lot of sense because I always say to my girls or whoever is a potential client, whoever I speak to and says that they're struggling with seeing the results, I never deny the motivation and effort and consistency because most people actually turn up and they are fully aware that there is some work to be done, but they lose motivation when they see the results. What do you think is the major reason? Like whatever comes first to your mind, I want to hear it because there is quite a few factors that we have to take into consideration while strength training. But what is number one if you were to pinpoint? I know it's a tricky question, but first thing that comes to your mind.
yeah, I think it's really important to say that as well. The it's not like a lack of motivation, like you said. It is just people perhaps not knowing where to focus on. And you can have like 100 things going on at once, but if you don't know which ones to prioritize and you try and get them all at the same level, you're never going to get anywhere. So I think what I see often, because again, like you said, it's a tricky question to answer, but the main thing I see is that people aren't tracking what they're lifting. And as we know, and I'll explain now, progressive overload is the key to building muscle and strength training. If you're not progressively lifting something heavier or improving the intensity in some form, you're never going to improve on that thing. In
Nice. So
simple
you would
terms.
say that progressive overload is that first concept that people need to focus on. Okay, I wouldn't
What would
agree with
you?
you.
Yeah, I was going to say. I'm going to
um,
say, what's your opinion on that? Because I can
yeah, the
see.
thing is that progressive overload is king, absolutely. But let's maybe at this point explain to people that might not know what progressive overload is. It's basically progressing consistently and gradually, either with load, with volume, with the quality of movement, with time under tension. So in general, progressing. And I think before we even dive into progressive overload, I think we should address the quality of movement because people do progress, but they progress with poor form and progress maybe not within the variables that are, let's say, yet within their reach. What do you think?
Mm.
Do you know what I mean by this?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think lots of, especially because I work with lots of guys, well, I work with guys that have a level of training already, and lots of them come to me being like, I can deadlift this, I can squat this. And when I have a little look at the form, I'm going, well, actually,
We're
we're
gonna
not
strip it
deadlifting
down.
this. Yeah, yeah, we're not deadlifting 100 kilos because if we're doing it correctly, you're only going to be deadlifting about 60 probably with that form because you are
Yeah.
not working in, as you're saying, in with the correct technique. So then you can't physically progress any further because you've hit that wall with poor technique.
Totally. And there is something called motor recruitment, and
Mm,
that will involve how well you're firing up your motor recruiters and how well you connect to the muscle. So if you miss that, you will not even engage the muscle that is supposed to be performing the movement. Obviously, you can use momentum, you can swing, you can jerk, you can yank, but not only is it dangerous to start with, but also it doesn't involve engage the muscles that we are aiming at engaging. And yeah, I see it. Do you know what? Would you say that it is more common for men to be lifting this way?
I think if we're looking at stereotypes, yes, because there is this kind of, again, there is, it's person dependent, but I feel like this is probably more common with men. But there is this kind of competitive nature of, Steve next to me's bench pressing this, so I'm going to bench press the same as Steve because I'm as
Hmm.
strong as him.
As
Whereas
Steve
if
has
we
been
go,
training for 10 years and is twice my
exactly.
size, but I'm still going to do the same as Steve. Yeah, yeah. I see it a lot in the gyms. Do you ever see it with women? Because obviously I work with women and
Mm.
I've got my little spin on it. I'll tell you my insight, but have you noticed that women do the same or maybe less?
I think again, it's really person dependent. So like I'd say with my guys, it's 50-50. I've trained a few women in the past, and I think I used to do some like a small group coaching with three women that were friends, and they were the most competitive people I've and like all of them would be like, "You go first, and I can beat you." Like they would all be arguing about who would go last, so that they could essentially be the strongest because they'd
Yeah,
have a benchmark to go again.
and that
So
is
I think
interesting. It's
it's tricky to
interesting
say,
what
isn't
you're
it?
saying, because I notice that women, when they are around other women, they get that. They get very competitive. in the environments maybe when they are minority, like in the free weights area, and that is dominated by men, let's be honest, they get a little bit shy. But I still do see that. I always ask my clients, like on a regular basis, to send me their videos from workouts at certain points in certain phases of their training, and I see the development, how they grow from the shy girl into actually a little bit sometimes ego lifter, or maybe ego lifter is kind of doesn't do the justice, because sometimes it stems from just not realizing that your form has already depleted, that your ranges are not the same, you stop controlling. And that video feedback, I always say, is for me, but it's also for them. Do you do that with your
Mm.
clients?
Yeah, massively. I think as well on that, it's really important to look at what using that even as a way to motivate people. So, for instance, if I talk about myself, I like I'm not a very competitive person. Like, so if
And
I've
you
got
should
so
hide
and
it.
so,
I'm still gonna
yeah,
refer to that.
I know, Julia, I'm like a hypocrite in myself, but like I look at things and I'm like, if someone goes to me, for instance, I was in a situation the other day and I was doing a Harrods class and we were doing it in partners and I was with this girl who was so strong. And this guy came over to me and was like, are you going to let the girl lift heavier than you? And in my head, I went, yeah, I am actually going to let her lift heavier
Nice. This is
because
a
she's stronger
coach
than me.
approach. Exactly.
I think it's really important to like to tap into those moments to see what motivates people. So, for instance, if we look at stereotypical boys, most stereotypical boys do work well with that competitive nature. So sometimes not pitting people against each other, but giving that level of comparison helps push people forwards a little bit further. I guess again, it's the same with your girls. If they're now feeling comfortable at a certain level, they then feel like, right, actually, I am comfortable with this now. I'm going to look at Sarah. Sarah's doing this, and I'm going to kind of copy Sarah and try and beat her. And it's kind of not looking at it as a it again goes back to the progressive overload side of stuff. It's not looking at it as like a competition, but like, okay, they're doing that. So I want to improve myself. And they're an improved version of me. So I'm going to work towards them in loose terms.
Totally. And you know what? I am not a fan of comparing to others, but at certain point with the girls that have never done any strength training before and they join my programs and they feel shy or they underestimate their capabilities and their movement patterns are there, they're body aware and they're still not lifting as heavy as I know they can. This is when I throw a little bit of comparison. Like, do you know what is the normal ratio to lift at that weight and after that period of time? And sometimes they ask, okay, so what does this girl lift, let's say, in the program that has the best results? And it does motivate, but you have to be careful with those and throwing those comparisons. But yeah, with women, I believe it's more the case of underestimating than overestimating their capabilities. Cool. So we
Uh,
do agree that form and progressive overload are two massive factors. What do you think? Yeah,
I
you
would say, yeah, no.
go for it.
I would say when we talk about progressive overload, I don't think obviously progressive overload, as we've just said, is like the key factor of all muscle building, but I think it's more the tracking side of thing that gets overlooked. People aren't actually tracking and structuring what they're doing in a progressive way to be able to progress. They're kind of going, okay, well, I lifted this XYZ on Thursday. I'll do that again in 2 weeks, and kind of staying at the same level of what they're doing and not gradually tracking things and going, okay, well, I can see that I'm able to do this. Like you're saying now, I see I've got the movement pattern and the strength to do this, so maybe I should push that a little bit more. And I think
Mm.
all of that comes from tracking as opposed to just feeling.
You
It's where we have
know,
to look over data.
there is another side to this because I see that people do track, but they track in the wrong manner. So they do know their lifts, but they don't know how many reps, they don't know how many sets, and they kind of don't tune in to how they felt that weight last week or 2 weeks ago. And for us women,
Mm,
obviously, there is another factor that needs to be taken consideration of, which is our cycles. And
mm,
I always say, you cannot drive that progression every single week equally like men can, obviously assuming that all the other factors and variables like your sleep, your nutrition, your recovery, which we're gonna tap into in a second, are in place. But with us women, our hormones are going to be working slightly against us, and we're going to need a bit more energy coming from food, for example, to be able at least to match the last week's. results in, for example, 2 weeks before our cycles, our periods. So it's very important also to take notes, because it is impossible to remember how many reps you've done in the first set and then in the second set and the third set. And I see my girls make their common mistake. I don't know if your boys do the same. Like they look only at the first set of an exercise, but then I always ask them, like, look at the whole and picture. Like, you need to analyze all three, four, or whatever sets you've got designated, and see what's the tendency. Are your lifts coming down, or was it the 3 times 10 on every single set? Because then it tells me that possibly one set was either too weak or too like not good enough in terms of the form. Do you get me when I talk about 3 times 10? Um,
Yeah, I think with my guys, we have something called testing week. So at the end of each phase, they have a testing week essentially, where we will focus on one or two exercises each session, where we look at personal bests and form progression, etc. So with your guys, that's really interesting to hear. Like, how would you move that around, like their cycles? Would you just be like, oh, we're going to shift that slightly to be more suited to how you're feeling that week, or do you do it based on food, like you just said, or how would you approach that if you were looking at it from a testing week point of view?
From a testing, well, we would be definitely working around the cycles, and I would never be putting like cycles. Most of the time are regular, like plus minus a few days. But most of us women should at least have regular cycles. We're not talking about certain conditions, but let's say from healthy standpoint. So then obviously I would never be pinpointing that testing week for the week of the luteal phase, where with the
Mm.
weekend when our estrogen drops and our performance undeniably is decreasing, and so is recovery, and also that focus to muscle mind connection, and just doing performing exercises with good form. So how often do you do those tests?
It depends with the client. So it will be between 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes even 8 weeks with some guys. Again, it depends on their schedules. It's a little bit different for us guys. Again, on their
Mhm.
schedules, what they're doing for work, what it is that they're actually trying to achieve. So if they're training for something like a high rocks, or if they're just training for fat loss or just strength, it all plays into
Yeah.
account.
Do you know, I'm not a fan of doing those testing weeks on a regular basis. And do you know why?
Mm,
Because,
hit me, Julia.
yeah, with no criticism, just, pouring my heart out. But I'm thinking, there is so many variables that you have to take into consideration. And, let's say you do your testing week 1, week 6, week 12, 18, and so on and so forth. You need to analyze all the variables. Obviously, we're talking that makes sense for athletes, because I used to work with athletes, and it does perfect sense for them, because all the variables will be ticked, because that's their job. They live to perform whatever sports it is. So it makes sense. But then assume your guys, one period of 6 weeks, they had holidays, they were ill, they traveled, they didn't sleep well. You're still with us?
I'm
Yeah.
still going.
Don't leave me. They didn't sleep well. They had work overload, and the stress was high. So that will all impact the performance, and then the results will not be very accurate. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think it's about, again, dependent on the client and the person, on what it is that we're actually testing. So, for instance, some people it is going to be like the strength that they can do with this. For some people, even like you're saying, if they're going to be on holiday or they're going to be away and doing loads of stuff, we'll look at something slightly different, like the maximum time they can hold a plank, or do you know what I mean? These little things that I think are really important to sprinkle in as a way of motivation. It's like what we touched on way at the beginning. If you don't see or feel that you're progressing, your motivation goes.
Totally.
And I think doing sprinkling little things here and there to go, oh, actually, in these 6 weeks, I've managed to hold a plank for 30 seconds longer, or I've managed to add even 5 kilos onto my bench press. Like, you just see these little numbers, and it which is something in your brain to go, oh, okay, I'm on the right path, I'm doing something. Whereas if you're not looking at, it's not even
Yeah,
testing.
that's
It's
what I
testing week.
wanted
Maybe
to
it's the wrong name.
say.
Maybe we look at
Mm.
rebranding, Julia.
Yeah.
So we look at just
I inspired you. But that's what I wanted to say. This is what we do on a regular basis. And I'm sure well, at least most coaches should do that with their clients to keep the motivation up, and also have it black and white. Like, look, like sometimes our impression of how we perform, like we our worst critics. So the impression of how we perform and how well we progress might be biased, and most of the time it is biased because we're in the middle. We rarely ever zoom out, and that's why people get coaches just to prove to them, like, look, this is written black and white in your tracking progress, or that the lifts are going up. But sometimes lifts are misleading as well, like when we talk about the quality of movement and adaptation. So coming back to subject, because we've really got wide into other bits, because yeah, I can talk about strength training forever. How would you um, see nutrition affecting the results in strength training, because that's undeniably very important part, and it
Yeah,
affects.
I agree. I think it's one of the things that people overlook a lot. And again, if we go back to the all the things at once that we're trying to juggling, I think nutrition is the thing that always kind of falls to the bottom. People go, "Oh, I'm doing 5, 6 strength sessions a week," and then you look into their nutrition and they're eating terribly. It's not going to work hand in hand together. And I think it's really important to know that the two need to meet in the middle. And that doesn't necessarily mean having like a full structured meal plan, hitting every single macro, every single thing perfectly, but it's about having something that works hand in hand and kind of, what's the word? Not accelerates, but
Enhances.
enhances the process exactly.
Yeah, the thing is, I speak to so many women that do get stronger in the gym. They are consistent, and they say progressive overload doesn't work. I don't see the results. And they are, for example, for either fat loss or recomposition. And they've heard somewhere that progressive overload drives the progress, and they don't see it. Like, it changes body composition, lowers body fat, increases muscle mass, or at least preserves it. And they don't see the changes. And what I've noticed is when people don't track or don't pay any attention, because again, I'm also not a fan of always tracking and hitting every single macro right, but at least there needs to be some intention behind it. So when people put no intention and pay no attention to food, they very often end up overeating, because your physical activity is higher, your energy requirements are higher, and your hunger might be bigger. So if you don't control what you put into your body, what macros, and each macro, fats, carbs, and proteins play different role in our recovery, performance, and hormonal balances, etc., then you end up actually not seeing those results, even though you're getting stronger, and you might see a little bit more muscle definition, but you're still kind of, fluffy, or you're not as big as you want, like depending on your goals. Your boys probably want to be bigger, my girls want to get toned, yeah, so a little bit
I
tighter.
think, yeah, on that as well, it's really important. This is where I have the argument about like that it's gonna be horrible, but like about group exercise classes and kind of that hits element. Now, while they're great, and like lots of people come to me, right, about this. You've set me off, Nadia.
It's
There's
a
loads of
good
people come to
subject,
me
isn't
being
it?
mm, having they look at people that do CrossFit or High Rocks, if we look at the two examples, and they go, "Oh, I want to look like again Steve
Let's
that does
be
High
cute,
Rocks or
let's
does
put Mark
CrossFit,
in
who's
there,
got
yeah.
like we love Steve,
Okay, where is it going?
who's got
Okay,
like
I'm
big
curious.
arms." Yeah, we look at Steve who does High Rocks on CrossFit, who's got like big arms, big chest, like he's a massive person, but he's also incredibly good at like CrossFit. And people go, ah, Steve must do CrossFit to look like that. But in reality, Steve has done 4, 5, 6, however many years of strength training as a base before he moves into these kind of hits and like Barry's F45, these kind of high intensity ways of working. Because those ways of working, while they do build muscle, like you say, they make you heavier, they make you hungrier, they make you tired, so you're going to eat more, all these things that make you want to consume more calories. So while you are getting stronger again, you're not maybe necessarily seeing the definition or the size that you want to see, because it's more of a bam bam bam, high impact, high intensity, consistent throughout the week, whereas you're not varying that with like one or two hit sessions and three or four strength sessions.
I also noticed that Hyrox obviously undeniably has gained popularity, and it's pretty trendy to do Barry's classes or High Rocks. And I would never recommend those classes to beginners because they, like you mentioned, are high intensity and use quite complex lifts. And if your form is not spot on, if you're not body aware, if you can't connect to the muscles and you can't control your eccentric phases, and you don't even know what an eccentric phase is, you're just screaming for an injury. So that's one. Two, those classes or people that professionally or semi-professionally do those still progress their lifts there. So the classes normally, to be honest, I haven't done much CrossFit. I used in the past, but it wasn't my cup of tea, at least not for long enough. But I would assume that the classes progress the workouts somehow, but nonetheless, they are still group classes. So there is no individual element that drives the progress
Mm.
for the physique. And here comes another very important factor in why people don't see results, even though they might be putting lots of effort and are consistent with strength training, is the probably fact that they change their workouts too much, too often. What do you think about that?
Yeah, as a former F45 coach, and don't get me wrong, I love an F45 class. The whole premise of that brand is that you never do the same
Oh,
workout
great.
twice. And I think, yeah, I think while from like if you're someone that just wants to get fit and wants to like improve the way you are as a person, like your functionality, like your heart health, those kind of things are great. And if you want to have things that constantly change to keep your brain alert and awake and interested, then I think it's great for that type
Totally.
of person. Whereas if you're someone like we're saying that wants to get bigger arms or get bigger glutes or grow your muscles into a certain size, it's not going to help because you can't progress anything. You can't, there's no way to track. Again, if we go back to our testing weeks, there's no way to go back to track your variables because if you're going from 6 weeks of complete different workouts and then having a testing week at the end,
What are you
how are you meant to
testing?
test
What's the
anything if
benchmark,
you've not
right? Yeah.
exactly, you have no benchmark to test
So
against?
now I know how they run because I actually thought that every day is designated for a particular type of workout, and then the following week it progresses. At least in those fancy F45 classes, but clearly not. But I do work with girls that used to do those classes, and they come to me because they've plateaued. And I think it's important to mention that it's not just those classes; it's any classes because they don't have structure and they don't keep progressive overload principle in check. And this is, as we know, a basic driving factor. What else?
I think on that as well, it's really important to highlight, like what you just said, for people that are fresh starting out with fitnesses, I think group classes are an amazing place to start because it gives you that baseline like confidence to go, oh, okay, like I can do it. I can kind of hide at the back a little bit and copy the people at the front and approach it from a distance until I feel confident enough to do it. But as you just said, you're going to get to a point where you plateau, which is normally around about the 3 month mark with people doing these group exercise like F45s, classes of that sort, because you've not got that eye on you to go, okay, you, Susan, need to be lifting 1 kilogram heavier today because you've been with that 12 for the last 6 weeks. I think you get to a point where if you've not got that in your head and you've not got the knowledge to go, oh, I need to push myself today, you don't
But
in
it
those group
always
settings. You kind
feels
of
in those
coast along.
classes that you're pushing yourself because they are so high intensity, but you're pushing yourself in the wrong direction. Like your cardiovascular probably is constantly getting better, but at the same time, you also hit some plateaus at some point because there's as much as you can do in a limited time space for a group of people. And here comes another thing to my mind with the how quickly or how often people change the workouts. What do you think? What's your stance on it? Like, how often do you design programs for your boys? How often do you change? And maybe if you could talk about what drives that change, like what is the principle behind your method?
Yeah, so again, it's dependent on the person. Now I know as you said, it's good to keep the same thing as structure and progressively building it. But there are certain people that hate that. And if that's going to be the factor that stops you from going to the gym because you're just bored of your workouts, and I think it's more important to adjust them slightly. So for instance, if we're doing barbell lunges, to change it from weeks 4 onwards to then maybe to a barbell lunge or a walking lunge, and making those tiny little changes throughout to keep
To
people
trick
engaged, I
them,
think is
just
really
change the
key.
equipment.
You're giving my
Yeah.
secrets away, Julia. But to answer your questions, I would say most of mine go for about 6 weeks. 6 weeks is the average blocking that I give guys. Again, depends. If they're traveling lots, it will change. If they're maybe on a shorter program with me, it will change so we can like power through and get some foundations in. If they're the kind of person that switches off because they don't enjoy that kind of repetitive nature, again, we'll make it shorter. But it's all about, I'd say, about six
Yeah,
weeks
and do you change
would be
them
the
the
golden
workouts
ticket.
totally? Because I'm not a fan of changing too often, and it's obviously person dependent, like you've noticed
Mm,
very wisely. It is dependent on the client, and obviously, if we're talking keeping the same routine that you know as a coach that will work better and they will see better results if they stick to it for longer. But then we're fighting against total motivation and not turning up to the gym because they are so bored. Then obviously we change, right?
mm.
Or we tweak slightly. But I'm like for
Yeah.
yourself. So tell me, how do you also change your workouts every 6 weeks, or you actually hammer them for like half a year until yeah, I finally got that
Yeah.
PB.
So again, it depends what specifically I'm training for. So if we're talking about strength side of stuff, if I'm doing strength within High Rocks, it'd be very different from if I'm doing a strength training block outside of a High Rocks season. So if I'm
Is
doing
it the
outside
high
of a
rock
High Rocks
season
season,
now?
it tends to
Is it the high rock
then
season now? Is it? We're going
for
very
me, yeah, it's
see.
just started, yeah.
Yeah.
You're too cool for it,
Yeah.
Julia. You don't need to
Yeah.
get swept up in this.
Mm.
But it's really it's the same with eating. I'm quite a boring eater because I found things that I can eat that work for me. And I'm not fussed with, oh, I'm bored of this food now. It takes me a long time to get bored of a food. So for peace of mind and to save my brain space of having to think about what to eat today, I eat the same things pretty much every day. And it's kind of the same with my training. So I'll know, okay, this works for me. I've got this amount of time. So this is going to be the thing, the strength training blocks that I'm going to use. I'll go through the cycles and then I'll probably go back and reset and do the same and go back and reset and do the same. And it's this like continuous cycle of things. There'll be little things that change depending on like if I've got an injury perhaps, or if I've like wanting to build a specific muscle, like my shoulders are terrible. Do you know what I mean? There's always going to be little tweaks that are made, but the baseline of my own personal training stays the same on this kind of cycle that goes
Yeah, it's
round.
very important.
How would you approach
Yeah.
yours, Julia?
Well, I'm a fan of hammering it as long as it works, as long as I progress, and as long as I enjoy. But the for me, after so many years, the enjoyment comes from seeing the progressions, clear
Mm,
benchmarks. And as we talked throughout this podcast, you can only see that if you keep the same routine for X amount of time. I do not change my routine until maybe 16 weeks in. There might be slight changes due to time restraints, or maybe I design my program and actually don't feel like this. I'm connecting to the muscles, or I'm overtraining in that session, so the volume is too big, or But in general, I keep my routines really, really long, and the only reason for them to change would be either plateauing, but then I would look at the other factors, or just being bored with an exercise. But it's not going to be the whole routine that changes, actually. Yeah, I'm a stubborn
mm.
creature.
And
Like I set myself
yeah,
a goal, like this exercise I'm going to increase by 20% by X amount of time. If it doesn't happen, I keep that exercise. Maybe I just change the looking for word accessory exercises. Mm.
I was going to say on that as well. You just started to answer my question for you. With goals, how would you approach goals with a strength training point of view? Is it always like a specific weight that you can lift, or is it maybe like an aesthetic? Like, how, for you personally, do you approach your goals within your strength training?
Used to be trapped within the aesthetics, and it is probably the most frustrating way of setting your goals. As long as you're kind of keeping well, as long as you're reasonable, because most clients do come for aesthetic goals, to lose fat, to gain muscle, to shape in a certain way or form. But in general, the best way to track and to keep your sanity is to track your performance. I don't set particular goals, strength goals within time frames. I just know, like, I give myself more time to achieve. Because okay, let's rewind. Let's rewind. You could talk about certain ratio from a scientific point of view of change and what is likely to happen, but again, going back to our non-athletic public, and I'm also not an athlete. As much as I'm a coach and
Mm.
I do work, my work is not to train. My work is to coach others. So I cannot perform with the same ratio of change like an athlete that lives for training. So it's a bit silly to set the goals because you might not hit them because life happens, But I'm being realistic about those. Like, let's say I set the goal of I want to hit the 200 kilo hip thrust, and I'm far away from that. But now I'm enjoying just hitting more reps on 160. So for example, but it's more performance goals that I set than aesthetics.
Yeah. I think as well, lots of people, it's probably the same for you as a coach. Like lots of guys come to me with an aesthetic goal. That's the starting point of a conversation that people come to me. And very, very quickly, it switches. Once
Yes,
people get
we
into
want that.
working with a coach, they come in going, they're like, I want abs, I want glutes, whatever you want. They come in and about 6 weeks in, they're going, okay, now I want to do 5 pull-ups. Okay, now I want to be able to run 5K. And
Yes.
it always switches to a performance goal. And I think, like you said, if you look at performance metrics, it's data and you can actually see the data. And it's more enjoyable, like having this like it's kind of like little tiny checklists of like wins. And because you've got these little tiny ticks that you got on your little checklist, like, oh, it makes you feel like you've achieved something. Whereas the big overall aesthetic thing is going to take a year, two
Especially
years,
that the
however
scale
long.
is a bitch. It lies. And it's so accurate. And especially for
Yeah.
us women, it's like the most frustrating thing that you can put and measure your progress against. I'm going to slowly start wrapping up, and I will just mention one more thing. Um, volume, undertraining and
Mm.
overtraining. What's your stance on this? Because it also matters how and when and if at all is going to drive progress and visible results in strength training. So volume, under and
Yeah,
overtraining.
I think rest is really overlooked with strength training in general. Like, if we, again, sorry to go back to the class elements, classes and like that high intensity way of working are addictive. And people get really like, yeah, I want to go. And they end up going 6 times a week. And when you're hitting that 6, 7 times a week, you're not giving your body time to rest, to recover, and actually make improvements. And it's kind of the same with, well, it is the same with strength training. People go, well, I'm doing 7 gym sessions a week and I'm blah blah, I'm not getting any sleep. And that's the where we start to see problems of people plateauing because they're like, yeah, I'm going for it. It's like I'm all or nothing, like let's go for this now. And that is the point where people either plateau or they get injured and they dip.
Yeah,
But I think with that, if we look at it as an overview, rest is really, again, it's something that I need to work on personally. Rest is something that's really, really important. And I think with training, once you start in a strength training mindset, you start to enjoy it and you don't want to take the
mhm.
rest. So it's really, really important to have someone on your shoulder going, okay,
That's
you've pushed it hard enough now to tap out and give your body time to go rest, recover, and then come back stronger into it.
definitely rest is. Well, for many people, underrated, and they think it's actually cheating the gym and cheating the code. And I used to be like that, but now I hit 40 mark and I'm wiser. My joints, my sleep, my energy, my mood thank me a lot for it, and also the results are much better. So that is one thing. Recovery is one thing, but also there is something like I call it a metabolic adaptation cap. It's like a certain amount of volume is not gonna, like, once you cross a certain amount of volume of your sets, of your reps and load, that's how you calculate your overall volume. That's probably not for general public, but we coaches do that. So once you hit a certain amount of volume, you're counterproductive and you tap into that recovery capabilities. So if you exceed an amount of sets, and you do always 10 exercises per session, and you do those 7 sessions a week, and you're not being um, like kind to yourself, you're actually compromising your results. And the same is with undertraining. Some people train not often enough, or they might be training often enough but not with enough volume, and it all depends on which level you're actually at, like whether you're a beginner or a moderate, medium lifter, or advanced.
Yeah, I think on that as well, one thing that we've not mentioned, which is seems to be the obvious thing here, really, is that people just sometimes aren't pushing themselves enough. Like we've talked a lot here about how people are overtraining and not seeing results, but I think there is a big portion of people that think that they are training hard enough when they're not. And again, this comes back to form check videos that I get
Contact
from
and
my guys.
exertion
Like
levels, right?
exactly, like they'll this morning, for instance, I got one of my guys sent me a leg extension video, and straight away I was like, "You're not lifting heavy enough. I know from this video, if this is your last set,
I
this
literally
isn't
did
heavy
the
enough.
same
You're
with
having a
one
great
of my
time. You're
girls this
smiling."
morning. I was like, all great, but I don't see any exertion. There's like 5, 10 reps left. And when I actually say that,
Yeah.
like, push yourself, we don't push client, well, at least I don't, but I believe your smart coach as well. We don't push people to do anything outside their capabilities. Like, we're able to assess by your movement patterns and mindset where you can actually push, and certain machines where the trajectory of the movement is pretty straightforward are easy and relatively safe. So I always say sometimes you need to fail to actually understand where your exertion levels are and when failure is, to know what's the right exertion. So how do you tell your guys what the right exertion is? How do they assess their sets?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. So we kind
To
of
wrap it
the
up,
rule
but
that
I
we
think
have
literally.
with my guys. Yeah, I know. Keep going. The rule we have with my guys is so, for instance, if they've got 3 sets and it's the rep range is 10 to 12 reps, if all 3 sets they've hit the higher end of the rep range, they need to be going heavier. In as the overall rule, if they've got nothing else out of it, if they've done 3 sets and they've hit the higher end of the rep range for all three, we need
With
to
a
add in a
good
fourth set and
form,
we need
with
to
a
go
good
heavier.
full range of motion, with a nice time under tension. Because when I say that to my girls, they just hit those numbers, and they listen only to the numbers rather than the body's exertion. So I always say, I want to see the last 2 reps involuntarily slowing down. I want to see you shaking. I want to see the ugly face. Even if you're the most beautiful creature, I want to see the ugly face coming from you, because that means you're at the right exertion, right?
No,
I think
I
I'm gonna
agree.
stop
I think
us
it's
both here because we can just carry on. It is a very interesting subject, but we definitely didn't exhaust that subject, and there is lots more to mention. Maybe an idea for part two, and next month, or maybe some other time. But honestly, it was a pleasure to hear your thoughts and how you train yourself and your boys. And I come to a conclusion that it doesn't matter what the gender is, like both make similar mistakes, right?
yeah, I agree. I think it's more the person than the gender in all those
Yeah.
situations.
Right, lovely having you here, and thanks for spending this afternoon with me, and I'll speak to you soon, I believe.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll
My
talk to you soon.
pleasure. Bye.